Welcome everybody. My name is Atle Skjekkeland, CEO from Infotechtion, also now newly a Microsoft MVP for Purview. And thank you Microsoft for that nomination and recognition. Welcome to this webinar where we actually be talking about how to quickly implement Microsoft Purview and some lessons learned along the way. And we're joined here by special guests, one of the really smart CISOs out there, Gjert. Gjert, you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Hello, my name is Gjert Tronstad. I'm working as the cybersecurity director at Elkem. Elkem is an industry and manufacturing company originating out of Norway. Yes, I can go straight ahead and talk about Elkem. So yes, we are mainly producing silicone and alloy for the foundry industry. And this means that we have customers all from the automotive industry to medicine to also things happening on the moon, NASA. So we are approximately 7,500 employees, and we have production sites in approximately 30 sites around the globe.
So thank you. And also want to mention that when we have a chat function available, you can take questions, ask questions there. I know I'm not really good at multitasking, so I might have to then we'll try to answer your question at the end, and same, I don't know for Gjert, but ask your question along the way and we'll review them at the end, and we should have plenty of time also to address any questions you might have. If you're not familiar with who is Infotechtion, we're basically a boutique consulting and solution firm specializing in Purview data security and governance. Office and staff in the Nordic, Europe, UK, US, and India. We do consulting services, data security, governance strategy, implementation, change, and operating models, but also add-on solutions. Add-on solutions actually embrace Microsoft Purview and extend it with additional functionality or for additional workloads and technologies. That both for workspace governance, how to get control over Teams and SharePoint sites, but also for data discovery and security, for example, file service, what you have there that's sensitive, what's classifying that, what has value, classifying that, and getting rid of data. Similar for AI and a records lifecycle, how to keep that and manage that well. So if you have legacy solutions which you think Purview can replace, ping us for a demo of some of those solutions that embrace and extend Purview into those workloads. So let's get started here.
Yes, so we at Elkem, we wanted to start to look into, we see the amount of data is growing on a weekly basis. A lot of information is created. And of course, we want to handle that as best as possible. So we started to look into Microsoft Purview. And while Microsoft Purview is easy to sort of like just activate, it's a lot of functions we needed help to understand and have a best practice on how to get started on this. The data that we have in the organization is mainly, we are of course very, very afraid of losing that data or having it being shared with people that should not see it. So we then started to see, okay, what can we do about that? So we purchased the E5 license from Microsoft, the full E5 license, meaning now we got the full stack of Purview functionality. To begin with, we wanted to make sure data is not data compromised by external threats. We also wanted to make sure that people inside our company really wasn't copying information out to a USB drive or Dropbox or something else that we didn't have any control over. And of course, many of these instances is not that our employee want to do something bad, but it's to help them. So we can put up policies to help them to actually not do it what is considered dangerous. We also see that we, of course, now have a lot of sharing of information from inside. It could be sharing from Teams, it could be sharing from SharePoint, but how can we control what is shared and how it's done? And lately, we also, of course, have received everyone this information about AI. And AI uses information found within the company. But if we haven't classified the information and told AI what information to look for when we are building up the internal AI engine, classified information could be received back to the end users. So we wanted to see how can we actually accomplish and strengthen that part of the security.
And that last thing we see as more and more as a driver, because it's not just also reducing risk of implementing Copilot and those things that the business is screaming for, but also if you don't do it, you have shadow AI, where people then could take sensitive information, copying that into ChatGPT and other tools like that, and then that then stays there. So it's basically then to ensure that we're AI ready in the organization. Just want to also then jump in and talk a little bit about the technologies before handing back to Gjert. So looking at Purview and the requirements that Gjert just shared, because Purview has lots of different solutions, we ended up in focusing on the ones marked in red here, with information protection, to classify this and identify the sensitivity of information, data loss prevention to basically protect it, lifecycle management to ensure especially those things that are really important to keep, we can keep that and we can protect that, and inside risk management to ensure that when we have abnormal user behavior or something people circumvent the data loss prevention, we can identify that. And I'll show some example of what that means. It means that we don't look at this as standalone things, we look at them, how do they fit together to better improve security and meet Gjert's objectives. So give you a couple of examples there. One, information protection, that files get correct sensitivity level based on auto classification as much as possible, not manual, meaning that based on where you store it, based on the content, it gets classified, either automatically or with the user interaction. Data loss prevention then helps to ensure that user do the right thing. This can be just with a policy tip at the beginning, or it could be blocking, soft blocking, hard blocking, and basically stopping things. And inside risk management then detects if a user are circumventing the data loss prevention policies or exhibiting unusual behaviors. So as a practical example of this could be Ellen creates a strategy document for an upcoming bid to acquire a different company. She then put that document in the project team, and the document is automatically labeled and classified as confidential based on the storage location. But then you have Bob. He finds Ellen's document that's confidential and want to share that with the accountant. But here, in this example, you then have a blocking of that. But Bob then, all at the right, decides to go around the block, but downgrading the label and then be able to share it externally. So then Bob's perform is defined as extra risky by inside risk management, and alert is generated for Bob. And lastly, it means the technologies in the background here is really that you have the company has labeling that classify it automatically based on storage location. You have DLP policies that stops then things that we want to stop. And we have a priority user group inside risk management that then identifies abnormal behavior or workarounds or risky behavior. So how do we do this? Gjert, you want to start?
Yes, I can start. So as I mentioned, we purchased the E5 license. So, okay, we needed to find some of the tools to start with in Purview. And as Atle already showed, the information protection, DLP, the data lifecycle management, and the insider risk are the ones we wanted to run a proof of concept on. And when I reached out to Microsoft to find a partner that could help us in this, I wanted to have somebody that sort of like have a finished script or a script that could help us to quickly get started. And this is where we came in contact with Infotechtion, and they actually had a template that could help us. Atle, you can take us through the different actions that we went through, and I can come back a bit after again.
Yeah, we'll go through this in more detail, but it was basically is that we realized that over some years back before I met Gjert, that a lot of the requirements of the project we worked on was a lot of the same requirements you ended up on. Same personas involved, some of the same user stories, acceptance criteria, and the design ended up also being quite a lot similar across companies. So based on that, we then developed those templates or scripts, blueprints that Gjert referred to basically ensure that can we do this faster, smarter, and cheaper every time we do it. But we at the same time need enough time to transfer the knowledge to Elkem and other customer to ensure that they get enough knowledge to continue this journey by themselves if they want to do it by themselves. At the end of this 8-week journey, which was basically then workshop first to identify, set the goals, identify the requirements, and so on. I'll explain it later. It was then also with a pilot for, I think, 42 users, a lot also Chinese people. So there was a lot of time zones challenges for getting the right training sessions. But the outcome after 8 weeks was basically a blueprint, configuration sheets, configuration in the production tenant, pilot with 40 users, evaluation of the pilot, and a plan for how to do this with operating procedure, which is a lot of the standard template. But let's break this down in a little bit more detail. I already mentioned this. This is something we do when engaging people, basically to ensure, like Gjert said, we never come with a blank sheet of paper. It's all like, tell me how you're different. Tell me what's more important and less important for you to just speed up the process. But I think it's more talking about the approach is more important. So Gjert, any perspectives?
Yes, so we came from this. We had stored, as I said, more and more information on SharePoint and Teams and the other Microsoft platforms. And of course, how do we get started? And we, of course, know about this crawl, walk, run, and we had to start with the crawling. So what we did is actually, before we contacted Atle and Infotechtion, is that we have worked on a information security standard or a procedure governance work on how should information be handled and actually dealt with within Elkem. And I think this is a good way to start because it gives you sort of like an insight into how you actually want to handle this before you contact Atle. Otherwise, I think this is also something that's going to take some time. But anyway, we started on this after we had created the governance where we had displayed labels. And I'll get back to that afterwards to talk a little bit about what those are and what challenges we had by just looking at those.
And from a technology point of view, in crawl, walk, run, it often means that unless there's something really burning that needs to be addressed, risk needs to be reduced immediately. If it's really just about ensuring that we are more secure and moving forward, we often actually start with the crawl phase of just agreeing, should we try to avoid negatively impacting the productivity of staff? So it means that we're not going to disrupt any business process in the first phase. Instead, we're going to figure out what is sensitive, ensure that's classified, and then start learning where does sensitive information, confidential information get downloaded, shared with externals and so on. So we can use that insight to then say, oh, this needs to be stopped. Oh, this needs to be allowed. Or are there other ways we can work more effectively, more safer, more secure than this process? That's why it means that going into this of thinking through what are objectives, and based on that thinking what change are we willing to take in the business, or should we start more from a technology point of view or security point of view and ensuring a baseline. Let's break this down a little bit more detail. The journey we usually go through that we recommend, even if you want to do it by yourself, is start always looking at what's important, what are the objectives, what's the vision, what's the to-be state, drawing that up, and then identifying what are the use cases, what's important for the different stakeholders. And already at that first phase is, if you're going to do a pilot to test and get feedback on things, it could be, for example, a policy tip doesn't make sense for people. Do they understand that this is an Elkem policy tip, not a Microsoft policy tip that comes in Outlook or other places? Identify those quickly so we know, and we can have a time when we do the pilot, we have all of those secured, the relevant stakeholders. And then go into one work stream at a time, first sensitivity labels both for files, PDFs and emails, but also for workspaces, Microsoft 365 groups, Teams, SharePoint. So you also have 2 levels of protection there with sensitivity labels. Then the data loss prevention, then the insider risk, go back to this holistic view I talked about earlier on, and lifecycle management with the pilot closeout. So these are really the steps we usually go through, but let's break them down from see what did they end up at Elkem.
So as I mentioned, we have created these sensitivity labels. We have created what does it mean? What does each of these levels mean in Elkem? And what we really then are looking into is by Microsoft as well. They recommend don't have too many sensitivity label or categories that you can, because it's only going to make it more confusing for the end users. So we ended up with 4. Open, internal, confidential, and top secret. And it's interesting to notice the colors here. It seems very easy to talk about colors, But again, we come from a global company. There's been a lot of merger and acquisition. And of course, how this was implemented in the different part of the company made it difficult to find one common way of doing it inside our company. So even things, small things like finding the correct colors to apply actually take quite a lot of time during this process. But anyway, what we had decided to do is open, where we say that this is a document or content that could be publicly shared. This is, of course, like marketing materials. It could be blogs, stuff like that. Internal is more like what is default. All information that we now start to create, it could be an email, it could be a document. All of that is now by default set to internal. And this is, it could be used internally in the company without anything, but of course, sharing it outside, we should be more cautious. And then you have the two last one, which is confidential and top secret, where we, for instance, in top secret say it should not be shared with anybody outside of the company. And we also can have things like where should it actually be stored? So you can't store it wherever you want. Again, I think this is just Elkem's way of doing it for now, but I guess, Atle, you have come across quite a lot of different ways of ending up here.
I think that the key is here, keep it as few as possible. So you have some companies taking it one step further. That means you have 3 levels. Often it's open or public, internal, and confidential, or something like that. The coloring also varies. Many people try to follow the traffic light, but there's often a big discussion, and I love seeing grown-ups arguing about should internal be yellow or green. And sometimes you don't come to then the compromise sometimes be let's then call it blue instead. So then so there's pros and cons each way. I would also say that yes, of course, you have multiple types of confidential or top secret information. For example, it could be insider information, it could be privacy data, it could be privacy data with special character as a special type, like unions, sickness, these type of things. It could be intellectual property, it could be power sensitive, energy sensitive type of information, but only name those as, I would say, subclasses or introduce as sublevels if there's a use case for having a unique configuration or something happening around that. And currently that means that often we end up having these top most confidential levels as more sub labels, so you can add more categories underneath there. For example, recipients only, do not forward, and using encryption for that. There was a question coming in here from the beginning about encryption. I saw a chat popping up. You want to just address that? How did you think about encryption in the first part of the journey?
In the first part of the journey, we are absolutely, like this guy asked, why we wanted to have encryption. On top secret, we wanted to have encryption on confidential. But again, there are consequences and there are problems. And after discussing it thoroughly with Atle and his team, we ended up with saying no encryption. And Atle, you can explain a little bit about the technical things here.
It's really just understanding also what's the impact of having encryption, because it impacts business processes as intended. Are you willing to take that change now or later? Secondly, it impacts also other technologies that you might rely on. It could be third-party systems, other things that also, as I said, depend on this interaction with this. Public sector, for example, where we're here now, they rely on PDF-A, which by design doesn't allow encryption. So you have to then really understand if encryption is necessary, what's the impact on that on business processes and other technologies that work together with this. And if you don't have that insight, then it might be better to start using without encryption, just for labeling purposes, using DLP for protection scenarios. And once you have better insight of where is that confidential information going, then start turning on encryption, or have encryption as a sub-label underneath confidential. So you have 2 options for a period until you move towards encryption for everything that's confidential. Then we also, that's the MIP with classification levels. Then we have the DLP policies. And the DLP policies is really then what's the trigger condition that will lead to an action and what's the user interaction. And Microsoft have a number of different DLP solutions, You have, for example, Office or Microsoft 365 DLP. You have endpoint DLP. You also have links to cloud to then figure out to basically protect information. So sometimes in the first crawl phase is really thinking about using sensitivity labels to classify information and DLP to sort the protection scenarios. What's the behavior we want? But again, with the crawl, walk, run, is it better than to start off not blocking people in the crawl phase, but instead guiding people make the right decision? So there are multiple ways you can do this. Here's an example of some of them. For example, you see something in the sense information in content that automatically generates a DLP policy of what's the right sensitivity label, stopping people doing things. I think in the first DLP we introduced, Gjert, was very basic. Like if somebody writes confidential in an email, should there be a policy guiding people then to classify it correctly? I think we also implement a policy that's no longer needed, and that is if you send an attachment to a colleague by email, have a policy tip, share a link instead. But that's now come built into Outlook, so it's not really needed that much anymore. But really just looking at this, starting with baseline security for DLP, and then going into specific use cases with the different stakeholders. Okay.
Very good.
So then the third one, which I know is perhaps the most focused on for the moment yet.
Yes, and as you know, have understood, we have had this 8 weeks implementation plan with Atle and his team, where we have implemented sensitivity labels and a few other things which we have started working on. Now we are going to do a more next phase where we start to look into the insider risk management in more detail and how we can actually use this to even better understand the risk of internals. Typically, this is one thing that we are looking here is, for instance, when people are leaving Elkem, how can we monitor, make sure we are doing this and understand how they are handling things? How can we, people with access to sensitive information, how can we make sure they are not storing that information on removable storage, for instance? So there's, as you can read here as well, there's many other things that really is things we want to look into. At the same time, I also think that we are a company which is under GDPR laws and things that we have to follow up on. So how can we handle this in a good way? Of course, this is not necessarily only in insider risk, but it's also an important part to how can we monitor and do this legally.
So if we then follow the crawl, walk, run methodology, what also then start with here is basically looking at from crawl for insider risk management, starting with data leak policies. It could be looking at things being taken from specific SharePoint sites that have sensitive information. It's also, we see more and more file extension. This might be file extension that sensitivity label don't support, CAD drawings and all things, but it's also very critical infrastructure and other things that, how to say, could even be in some industry subject to laws and regulations. But also especially marked in red, when things are classified to be confidential or top secret, that's really, we want to ensure that, how to say, that information is not leaked or stolen. We also then priority user group. That could be people that have, based on the role, some sort of access to very sensitive information and then monitor them, control that more carefully. Or consultants like us, hired in with internal access to ensure that we don't use this information or take this information with us to help in the next engagement or whatever. So that's usually on the crawl phase. In the walk phase, it's much more about connecting this usually to an HR system, where you then see when are people handed in the resignation, for example, and then look at then as a risky group or priority group of saying what do they then change behavior after they hand in resignation. We also know, not from Elkem, but from some other clients, that if you're a large, well-known company with a lot of IP, the join and leaver scenario is also a high-risk area where the data theft has been discovered, meaning people join you mainly from the espionage. And during that probation period, the first 6 months or so, they basically copy what they can find and try to gather as much information and leave again before the probation period is over. So that's also some work we have done for other organizations on the more walk stage of improving, I would say, with using inside risk management to identify data theft. Lastly, of the technology, we also have discussion started with the 8 weeks at Elkem of data lifecycle management. What do we need to do? It's really about, should we, instead of just being data hoarders, should we actually try to get rid of redundant, obsolete, and trivial data? Being a Norwegian, I would say this is against our culture. We are hoarders. Just give me more OneDrive storage, please, or SharePoint especially. But there is a benefit of getting rid of data that's redundant, obsolete, and trivial. It's not only to reduce your storage cost, especially for SharePoint, but also to reduce the attack surface when you get hacked. And it's also for AI readiness, to ensure that AI actually then don't use all data or personal data to generate results for you in the process. At Elkem, the priority at first implementation ended up being actually record labels. And record labels to ensure that it was technical documentation, especially, that you can lock that and you can trust it in the future. It can't be deleted, it can't be edited without going through a process. And you see the padlock then showing up to the file, and you know therefore that you can trust integrity, authenticity, and reliability of that file in the future. There's actually another benefit of this, and that is it reduces the risk of hacking with ransomware, because it means that hackers that get access can't easily then, or can't actually then try to, how to say, encrypt that file, and then, how to say, having to charge you trying to either steal it or asking you for ransomware for actually getting access to your data again. So that's often a starting point to do it. Gjert, what about, now we talked about technology.
We have talked about
getting this into the organization.
Yes, and for us, of course, implementing this is technically it's quite easy. I mean, the technology thing is quite easy, but getting it implemented into this whole organization really takes an effort. And we know this from before, not only by working with this project, but we know that training is important. Just communicating the sensitivity labels, communicating, okay, you should not have multiple versions of a document because that could mess up the result you get from AI. These are just fundamentals that everybody needs to know when they work, so we don't get bad results, or we are, as Atle said, increasing our storage at a rapid pace. So for us, it was important to set up training, and Infotechtion also here came in and actually gave us some good insights into how to do that, and his team build a good training exercise for our end users.
And training, of course, or communication and training is really about covering the why, the what, and the how. Always starting with the why, like why do we need to do this? And that's why what Gjert mentioned earlier on, having the policies, the standard already in place and agreed upon and anchored up in organization, then we can then basically show this is a requirement that we have. It's not just that we in technology has woken up saying we need to do this. It's also that you get management support and all things for doing this. And it's not really train and forget. It's an ongoing reinforcement to change the data security, data governance culture in the company. Also want to perhaps also talk about a little bit monitoring and metrics, because it's the old saying is that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So Gjert, you want to start off here?
Yes, so this is a company culture and I guess this is the same with all of you. If you make a change, you need to measure it. And again, here we came in, we had a discussion with Infotechtion, how to do it. And of course, it's easy to come up with 1 million different KPIs, but you really have to agree on someone. And as you can see here, some of these are things that we have started to look into, but Atle and his team can help work together with you to actually come up with the ones that actually suits your organization best.
I would also therefore say that we really focused on what metrics really matters, because you can sometimes go crazy here with like, oh, we want to do this. Instead, figure out what are the main objectives that you want to measure, and what are the supporting metrics against this? And especially if you can then ensure that those top overall metrics or goals meet, how to say, the overall strategy or data security objectives, so it sees that it flows up. What you see on the screen here are some of the more common things we look at for more operational governance and security in Microsoft 365. For example, workspaces. Are we active? Do we have them without owner? Are the things are they empty? And so on, just to ensure that we have the governance of the workspaces in place. Do they all have a container label? Do they all have a default label? These type of things. Then the content. How many files do we have, especially when we use default labeling in Office and Outlook? How often do they change by users? How often do they change by the technology? And basically, how much are basically that type of stuff. And of course, then you have other compliance, adoption. I think adoption is also important. Even though we try to automate, as I said in the beginning, I don't really believe in manual labeling and relying on that. Even though manual labeling sometimes gives us a lot of good insight for opportunities for automation, so it has its value. But aim for automation, but using metric then to see where do we need to improve? Is it on the adoption side by getting people to store it in the right location, or is it more on technology side to improve more automation? So I think that was what we planned to cover. I have one last slide before we start addressing questions. That is just if you want to ping me and I'll set up a call with me or colleagues if you want to discuss what does an 8-week journey look like, what resources will require, but this is usually quite lean and agile to do this. And to look at this as a journey, but quickly get them up and running and get implemented the baseline data security with Purview. To do this well, you need the E5 capabilities in Purview, even though because in the E3, you're missing all the automation and you're missing the inside risk management, a lot of things, but you have manual labeling available for you in E3, and you have Office DLP available for you, and container labels. But I think the real automation stuff, you have to have more in E3. I think that's the last. So before we address the question, do you recognize the cat yet?
Oh, yes, I do. This is something you just have to learn, guys. If you work with Infotechtion, there's always going to be a cat showing up in some slides or meetings.
So I don't actually, it might have been Elkem, one of the first one that the team started having that at the end of each status presentation, there was a picture of a cat, and then started that a trend that actually continued with a lot of projects. Of course, it all depends on the style and the culture, but just, how to say, as a way of doing it. Okay, questions and comments, and see it. So, should we just jump in and take some of them here? Are you using full E5 or IPG add-on for E3? Do you know yet?
Yes, we are using the full E5 client at the moment. This is something we started on last summer.
Of the things we discussed, you could do most of them with IPG add-on license instead of the full E5, but not inside risk management. It's on top of the IPG on it. But information protection, we talked about the data loss prevention and the data lifecycle management you can do with IPG add-on, but not the inside risk management and a lot of other things that's also included in the full E5. There's a last question. Let's see here if you just scroll, Gjert, and see if there's any questions you would like to take. There was a question here about.
I think Sorry. No, I think the question from Oscar Møllersen is very interesting. As he says, Microsoft Purview is extremely powerful tool, and it could be looked at as a surveillance of our employees as well. And as I mentioned before, GDPR is something that often come into mind here when looking at the log files and stuff. Luckily, there is stuff like obfuscation rules that you can apply, where you could sort of like not see the name of the people, and before it's actually starting to become a case, then you can log in with special keys. But of course, Atle can say more about the technical things behind here. But it's definitely a topic, and I think it's important that you have a communication with both the compliance team, legal team, and also in our case, the unions in many of these cases.
we actually over time also developed like a checklist of what are the things we need to check with different stakeholders. But we see every company is a little bit different depending on, for example, the setup of their mandate of their German worker councils, union representatives, staff representatives, and so on, and also how centralized they are on privacy versus decentralized, impacting the number of stakeholders you sometimes have to engage. But it's good to brief people and at least have they raise their hand about, I want to be part of this, I would like more information, so people know the relevant stakeholders before things are implemented. Automation, there's a question about accuracy of some of the trainable classifiers, that's machine learning or other automation techniques. We found that, there's a, so on some sensitive information types, some of them are very accurate, some of them are way less accurate. Like I say, things that are based on numbers, like what do you call it, structures like social security number can be very accurate, but you have this like Norwegian social security number. There's another one that kicks in as could that be new? Is it new? One of the Asian driving license numbers are influenced, have the same structure. So you have to scope it, for example, with adaptive scope to say it's these users or these sites with a property bag, and then use that to actually tune that to make it important. We also found that the trainable classifiers, Microsoft has also a lot of out-of-the-box trainable classifier, pre-trained machine learning. Some of them, like HR, is quite very accurate. Intellectual property is quite very accurate. Invoice is quite accurate. Others are less accurate. But again, can you scope it? The more you make it accurate. And of course, if not, then you have to use the custom and create. We have one big customer in the US that everything should be automated. And we actually also found that just using keywords is a nice way of actually getting quite a lot of things. And default labeling, meaning that you set a default on the folder or library, both sensitivity labels, but also retention labels or record labels. So files stored there automatically inherit that label. And until now, for sensitivity labels, you had to use scripting to retrofit pre-existing files, but that's coming as functionality, so it will automatically also then apply that to pre-existing file on the folder where you set a label. Let's see here, how the dealing, there wasn't the question of orphans, SharePoint site drives me crazy. Yeah, John, I completely agree. So I think the first step is then how do you avoid, stop the bleeding, then fix the patient? So how do you ensure that we don't get orphan SharePoint sites or teams moving forward? And that governance we put in place to that, how do we retrofit that on pre-existing one? Because, and especially if they're confidential sites, so they should be blacklisted, because that means that there's a lot more responsibility on the teams and SharePoint owner, and then the follow-up of that. Some of our customers, of course, had done a process that they have to then test every 6 months, 3 months or so, that the access and the setup of that site is right. But again, it puts more responsibility of ensuring a process around the ownership and follow that up, but also with the corporate structure. Does applying the labels to document lock them? I think that must have been, not sensitivity labels, not the retention label, but if you use the retention labels as record labels, then yes, it does. So if you configure a retention label, and I say that it should be, sorry, if you take a retention label and say we want to use this as a record label, you have a record label will lock the file, you get the padlock on it, and it locks the file from editing and deletion. So you can trust that this is what it is. You still have functionality to unlock it to create the final version when that happens. And then as a version control, it actually the software Purview creates a copy of the first record, makes that edible as unlocked. And then you lock it again, you actually created a new record, like a version 2 or a series on top of each other. But each one is kept based with the retention rules, and the retention rules at Elkem has been forever for technical documentation. And you can also set that default, by the way, on the folder, but I don't think you can set default on a library record label, but on a folder that pre-existing files automatically inherit. That's what you can do as manually. If not, you have to use scripted other ways of doing it. Hoarders are not only just Norwegian, hoarders are everywhere, not just Norwegian.
That's good to know.
but it's a serious point. We see North American people, lawyers especially, they are much more open for deletion due to the federal rules of civil procedure, the cost of litigation, where you have to hand over all relevant information in the court case. and then how to say, and the cost of doing that. While in Europe, it's much more, oh, when you talk to legal, it's much more, oh, I don't know. We could be sued tomorrow and have no clue what we could sue tomorrow, what we will have, so let's just keep everything. But Shell, the lady that was responsible for this at Shell, that now works for us, Susan Lamb, she usually claimed that for every time you meet a proud information hoarder that claimed that they saved the day because I kept this email for 20 years, for every one of those, you have 10 smoking guns in litigation. Smoking guns meaning that you have information that, oh, we shouldn't have kept that. Do we need to start, what do you call it, come to a deal and keep this out of court? So it really depends on perspective. And the last point about that is if you've really been into a bad GDPR situation where a lot of things go wrong at the same time, the risk of overstoring that is usually part of it. But then usually mess up other things, the wrong processes, access get wrong and stuff. But if you reduce the amount of privacy data, and Purview is really good, can be used for that. A couple of encryption we talked about, and perhaps go at the end here. Also label the data at rest. Yes. Bernd, thank you for that.
I think we have covered all of them now, Atle.
Yeah. Can you just talk about the last question, perhaps, Gjert? What's the communication channel? Did you have a dedicated resource to manage change management?
Yes. So we have a team in Elkem, or a person, like a communication person that joined us in this, that worked together with the communication experts in Infotechtion to create the training courses, and also the information that was sent out on intranet and other channels like Viva Engage. And apart from that, we didn't have anything else, but it was one internal communication person and Atle's team.
I think it's really good to have somebody in the company, because it's really figuring out what's the effective and knowing what's the effective or available communication channels we have. And that's difficult for us coming from the outside. It's better to have somebody at least on the receiving end that can say, oh, we can use this, and this, and help open doors. I think we're at the end of this here. Gjert, any closing remarks, recommendation for people?
No, I just have to say so far it's been a good journey, and I'm looking forward to the rest. There's a lot more to cover, and we'll see how it goes in the next 8 weeks.
Thank you all for attending. Thank you very, very much, Gjert, for attending and sharing from Elkem. I hope you all have a lovely day, rest of the week, and a lovely afternoon or day when that comes. Thank you again, Gjert. Look forward to seeing you all. Reach out. We'd love a follow-up call. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.